Johnny Depp's first introduction to Christianity was around the age of 6, and it was this introduction that led him to conclude that Christianity is false and also led him to ultimately become an atheist. But should this experience have led him to reject Christianity? Let's go ahead and start with his story.
But I had an uncle who was a preacher, my Uncle Denny, and, we'd have to go watch him preach on Sunday, and then it's, maybe I'm 6, 7 years old, and suddenly you see grown-ups, adults, throwing their hands up into the air, screaming, "I'm saved," running up and grabbing his ankle and kissing his shoe. And
Wait. Kissing his shoes? What kind of religious weirdos today would make people kiss their shoes?
Like, you gotta kiss my boot. That's real humility.
Fortunately, I don't doubt that he's telling the truth. That just doesn't sound very sanitary to me. Coliform bacteria like E. coli were extremely common on the outside of shoes. Yuck. Anyways, let's listen to the thing that ultimately led him to reject Christianity.
So for me, to see that, and it was intense, and again, like, I knew the guy. He carried a lead pipe in his golden Cadillac with a TV in it, to stove people's heads in if he had to. So I could see the two sides of the man. So at that ripe old age of 6 or 7 years old, I realized this is bullshit.
So it seems that Johnny came to reject Christianity because his uncle, who was a preacher, was living a double life. That means that the assumption that Johnny had at a young age was something like, if Christianity were true, my uncle would believe it. And if he believed it, then he would be living the life that he was supposed to be living. But in little Johnny's eyes, his uncle wasn't living the life that he should have been living, and therefore Johnny concluded that Christianity must be false. Now, I find this interesting because years ago, Johnny made it clear that he doesn't believe that anyone is living the way that they ought to be living. During an interview some years ago, he said, "We're all damaged in our own way. Nobody's perfect. I think we're all somewhat screwy. Every single one of us." What Johnny was doing here is he was acknowledging the fact that he and the rest of us aren't the way that we ought to be. When Johnny says that we're damaged, in order for that to mean anything, there has to be some sort of understanding or expectation of what it means to not be damaged. If my car is damaged, then that means that my car is not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be whole or in a perfect condition. And likewise, when he says that no one is perfect, this implies something that all of us know at some level. At some level, we all know that we're supposed to be living better lives than the ones that we've lived so far, but we aren't because, as Johnny said, we're all damaged. But given that this is his view, this naturally takes us back to his experience with his uncle. He realized that his uncle wasn't living the life that he should have been living, but according to Johnny, neither is anyone else, not even him. So why then did Johnny conclude that Christianity is false because of it? I mean, it's not like Johnny concludes that science is BS just because a scientist had a moral failure or was living a double life. And it's not like Johnny would accept anybody else concluding that all movies are wrong simply because Johnny isn't perfect himself. So why then would Christianity be false just because his uncle was living the life that he wasn't supposed to be? Well, to be clear, I don't know his uncle, and I have no idea if his uncle was a true believer or not. But even if he were, that wouldn't show that Christianity were false. If anything, it would actually show that Christianity were true. Now, if you're wondering how I could make such a wild and ridiculous statement, let me explain. The reason why is because what's central to Christianity is not that Christians are saved because they're more moral or better than other people, but instead, what's central to Christianity is that they aren't. Christianity agrees with Johnny that no one is living the life that they should be living. And as Johnny says, we're all damaged and none of us have lived a perfect life. Since we haven't lived perfect lives and we aren't perfect, then in Christianity, we can't live in the presence of a perfect God in heaven. If we have to be perfect in order to get into heaven, then that means that none of us are fit for heaven, especially me. The only person who was able to live a perfect life was Jesus, and that's why his sacrifice was so important. Jesus lived the perfect life that we all should have lived, and he offered his life in place of our own lives as a sacrifice, so that way when we stand before God, we're judged by the life that Jesus lived rather than the life that we lived. So Jesus then offered his life to us as a free gift. All we have to do is accept it. Now, of course, this doesn't mean that Christians shouldn't be living good lives, but it does mean that realistically, Christians will still wrestle with living in ways that we aren't supposed to. And this is why Johnny's conclusion about Christianity is wrong. His conclusion is based on the assumption that if Christianity were true, then saved Christians would be living how they're supposed to be living. But if we're not saved because of how perfect we are, but instead we're saved because we realize we need a savior because of how damaged and imperfect we are, then it makes sense that Christians can and will be imperfect people who are living lives that they shouldn't be living. You see, Christianity is realistic, and so Christians are free to be honest and authentic about their struggles because we know that we aren't saved because of the perfect life that we lived, but we're only saved because of the perfect life that Christ lived. So now with all of that in mind, the problem that Johnny had with Christianity actually makes sense once you consider the fact that his uncle conveyed the exact opposite of that. If it's true that his uncle had people kissing his dirty, nasty shoes, then the message that his uncle conveyed was not that as a Christian pastor, he's just as damaged as everyone else. Instead, he conveyed that as a Christian pastor, he was somehow better than other people who weren't as good as he was. And so given that, Johnny's conclusion actually made sense. Now, I'm sure Johnny has had other reasons since then that enabled him to continue rejecting Christianity, but nonetheless, the foundational reason that he gave for concluding that it was false was based on a faulty understanding of what becoming a Christian actually means. But if what Johnny said about Christianity is causing you to think a little bit deeper about this stuff, wait until you hear what Billie Eilish said about porn and what the implications are from that. That's an interesting one. So go ahead and click on this video to see what I mean, and I'll see you over there. Oh, I almost forgot. What do you mean?